Hey folks, it's Katie Phang with the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network. As a lawyer, one of the most disappointing things that we have experienced is the capitulation either in advance or after an executive order that's been issued by the convicted felon Donald Trump when it comes to big law firms. The absurdity of these executive orders is they just are there to be able to satisfy an itch for Donald Trump for perceived fictional grievances that he thinks that he has suffered. But the unfortunate consequence has been Trump being incredibly emboldened and empowered because these law firms have taken a knee. Take a listen.
What do you say to critics who say that your actions towards law firms amount to coercion?
Well, the law firms all want to make deals. You mean the law firms that were going after, that went after me for 4 years, ruthlessly, violently, illegally? You mean, are those the law firms you're talking about? They're not babies. They're very sophisticated people. Those law firms did bad things. They went after me for years. Russia hoax. All a hoax. It was a hoax. It was.
You know, I never want to attribute any accuracy to Donald Trump, but I have to right there because he's right. These law firms, they're not babies. They are professionals. They're incredibly sophisticated. So the fact that they could not see the reality, which is if you bow in advance to somebody like Donald Trump, you're only inviting more trouble. And we know that that has happened with several law firms, one of which prominently is a firm, Skadden Arps, one of the largest and most powerful law firms in the world. A law firm that not only has the financial resources, but the human capital, the people that would be not only having their jobs and lives at stake, but they could help fight against somebody like an autocrat like Donald Trump. And yet Skadden Arps, before they even had an executive order, bent the knee. But there is a person like a beacon shining in the night who said, "Not on my watch." Her name is Rachel Cohen. We're going to bring her in now. I know that you probably are familiar with her name because talk about being inspirational. I wanted the chance to be able to spend more time with Rachel outside of just the few minutes that we've had on my show. And I thought this is the best place to bring Rachel in. So Rachel, it's good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
It's so good to see you, Katie. I'm doing very well and can't thank you enough for the early amplification, the ongoing amplification, and the real dedication to speaking truth to power and framing these deals as what they are, which is bending the knee, potentially bribing the Trump administration in the hopes of being left alone. But we know what happens when you give a bully your lunch money, right?
Yeah. And we know what happens when you punch a bully back in the nose, which only a few law firms have decided to do. So really briefly, Rachel, get some people up to speed that perhaps didn't know your background. You were an associate working in the Chicago office at Skadden Arps. Talk about the work that you were doing there, but more importantly, what happened to make you say, not gonna happen on my watch?
High level, what caused me to resign from my former employer was being sure that there was no other option but resignation to get my firm to pay attention, to get the broader American public to pay attention to what was happening. And from there, I'll jump back to tell you about what was happening. The Trump administration has launched this kind of all-out assault on legal processes and procedures that are meant to prevent government oversight. And one of the things that's government overreach. And one of the things that's really meant to prevent government overreach is the court system itself and having lawyers to argue those cases within it. So the Trump administration has targeted these large private law firms through executive orders that threaten to strip them of their contracts with the government, to pressure their clients to drop them by stripping government contracts from their clients, to restrict their access to federal buildings, to do all of these things that make it a lot harder to be a profitable law firm. A number of law firms, as you mentioned, have fought those in court. So Perkins Coie and Jenner and Block and Wilmer Hale and Sussman Godfrey have all taken the Trump administration on in court and consistently won. Judge Beryl Howell entered an opinion in the Perkins case that was absolutely scathing. But a number of other law firms and people have accurately identified that those law firms are the ones that typically do more transactional work and thus might need government approval of certain actions, have come together and across the board have entered into these deals where they promise free legal work to the Trump administration. And so my firm did enter into a deal with the Trump administration, but I resigned prior because I had been involved in a lot of organizing across the industry to try to get the law firms to come together and act collectively, because it was clear to me that that was the only way that people would effectively be able to resist the president, right? And so as it became clear that firms were not going to do that, and the final kind of, oh my goodness, firms are obviously not going to do that for me, was the first of these deals offering the president free legal work. That was a firm called Paul Weiss that entered into a deal offering the Trump administration $40 million in pro bono legal services in exchange for having an executive order withdrawn. And it occurred to me that the kind of runaround that I was getting from my employer, the lack of real conversation and engagement about the authoritarian risks of these actions, that those had to be exactly what had been happening at Paul Weiss up until 2 hours before that deal was entered into and announced in the New York Times. So at that point, I submitted my resignation. I called it a conditional resignation, asking for the firm to respond appropriately and to be, a leader in this space on these issues. And instead, they decided to be a leader in terms of being the first firm to enter into a deal with the Trump administration with no executive order pending against them.
Yeah, Rachel, I'm going to actually bring up right now your resignation email because there are a couple of portions from it, some passages that really struck me when I read them. The first was the one that we see right now. This is not what I saw for my career or my evening, but Paul Weiss's decision to cave to the Trump administration on DEI representation and staffing has forced my hand. We do not have time. It is now or it is never. And if it is never, I will not continue to work here. I mean, Rachel, I want the people that are watching this to get some context. I grew up in the law, and you were an associate at Skadden Arps. It is incredibly hard to secure employment at big law firms like Skadden Arps to begin with. But you have a coveted position as a young woman, and especially women, by the way, in big law, very hard still. And you've got this coveted job, and yet you're looking at what's happening in real time, and you're telling yourself it's literally worth it for you to leave this high-paying job on principle?
Absolutely. And not only was I in big law, I got really good reviews. So it was definitely a place where I could have stayed longer term. Yeah. I have to be honest, I didn't see myself on partner track in big law no matter what. The work-life balance is very bad. And I also often wasn't really aligned politically or morally with clients that we represented, which are mostly large corporations. But I was not planning to leave my job on March 20th. And that was triggered because, honestly, Katie, one of the things that played a big role here is when I would talk to people about what was happening and make sure that they were reading the news, because that's honestly not something a lot of people in big law have time to do. They're working very long hours. And so I would make sure that people were reading these things and then get ready to talk about them. And I would say things like, I was a finance associate, so we do kind of complex financing for large corporations when they need to expand an operation or otherwise have big infusions of capital. That's part of what a finance practice is. And I would say to people, I'm going to end up staffed on financings to help prison corporations expand the Guantanamo Bay camp. We're going to wake up and wonder how that happened. And every single person I said that to said, oh, don't say that. No one said, no, we won't. A couple of people said, yes. And that was just the response that I got was yes. And so ultimately, when it came down to it, what I was steering down was my own self-conception, right? I have a self-mythology. I have a conception of myself as someone that if I was steering down the barrel of doing this immoral work before it happened, that I would refuse to do it. And in this particular instance, I not only had the kind of positioning of, okay, I need to refuse to do it. It hadn't come to us yet, right? Though I will say that now the Trump administration has said that the firms that made deals with it, there's an executive order directing the Department of Justice to work with those firms to set up programs so that they are defending killer cops. And I'm sure that that will not be the last kind of legal request put forth by the Trump administration to these firms that makes my skin crawl.
And let me interrupt you for a second though, Rachel, because let's get back to the legal basics. It's basically a contract, a bargained for accepted contract with terms that both sides have agreed to at Skadden and the Trump administration. So it's not like Skadden can be like, sorry, I'm not interested. Sorry, this one is not palatable for me. You made a commitment to devote those hours to the Trump administration, to the projects that they want to see done.
I certainly think that's possible. I also think the flip side of it is that there's a baseline question that no one has been able to effectively answer, which is, are these in writing at all?
Oh, yeah.
Because I agree with you. If they are, then that analysis is exactly right. But we don't know exactly what they say because they haven't been released. But my understanding is that on the ground in a lot of these large corporate law firms, the line is that these are not written and signed contracts at all, and that they are handshake agreements, which still could arguably be an enforceable contract, as you know, but for the viewers, that could be litigated. But I think that it's so telling that they are not written down anywhere, and you have these multi-billion with a B dollar law firms entering into quote unquote agreements with the government that are not even documented. The credit agreements that I worked on were 200 pages long.
That is
And
wild.
so it's
That is
really hard to see how these are not just bribes, right? And it's not, and how it's not hush money.
Well, I mean, think about it. So to your point, the incentive for the firms to do the work is so that they are not targeted by the administration. And when you and I had the privilege of speaking earlier, I said it really does boil down to one singular theme, which is profits over people.
Yep.
I get it that there are employees at these firms, and these firms are legion. There are thousands of employees for some of them across the globe. They have international footprints. And yes, I think that those employees should be paid and put food on the table for their families and stuff, Rachel. But here's the thing. The calculus that goes into what's happening right now it's the proverbial gun to the head, and yet it literally is what's happening. You have to take this deal, and yet some of these law firms like Skadden, without even an executive order, were clamoring to go and get this thing done.
Yep.
So the thing that I want people to understand too is, in this instance, did you guys have, even as an associate, did you have the opportunity to voice your dissent in any way other than via this email that you sent out firm-wide or office-wide? Was there even the suggestion that you guys had any type of buy-in as to what was going to happen at the firm?
Well, we had to make it. We had to make the situation where we were able to express our voice. In my resignation email, I was very careful to point out that the firm had not sent a firm-wide email about anything that was happening to the legal industry, and specifically to the corporate legal industry at any point. I was the first firm-wide email on that topic. And so we had, this letter circulating. I had reached out and requested meetings for, as soon as the Perkins executive order had come out, I had requested meetings with various trusted partners in leadership. And eventually I had one with one of them after I had already started speaking publicly and the letter had come out and all of these other things. And we also had a couple of associates committee meetings I know occurred at least a couple of different offices. And I also know that they all happened because associates affirmatively requested them. And within Big Law, even doing something like that, like sending an email to the associates committee saying, and leadership saying, we want a meeting to talk about this, there are firms where that would be viewed as dissent that would kind of blow up your career. These are very walking on eggshells kinds of places. And so I also think that there's two kind of points that I want to highlight in response to your really excellent point around profits over people. It's not just profits over like the American people. It's also profits over their associates who were subject to potential requests for their data through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Skadden's original deal didn't even get those dismissed, those requests for data. And then Jeremy London, the executive partner, sent a firm-wide email after I went on a couple of news programs and pointed that out and said, oh, well, we've renegotiated with the government and now those are dismissed, which again, to your point around legally enforceable contracts,
Sure.
you can't just renegotiate for the same consideration, the same thing that you've given up and get more stuff and then have that be enforced in court, which I think is also indicative to me that they know that these are not enforceable and that they are just hush money payments.
One of the biggest tell too is, I think, Rachel, is so Trump did a Truth Social post that we're going to put up on the screen right now. He did a Truth Social post specific to Skadden, and it's this big old long ass thing that we see on the screen right now. And what's remarkable is no one from Skadden in a management role, like Jeremy London, the managing partner, nobody came out to say any of that was inaccurate.
Correct.
It wasn't like Skadden said, look, go to our firm website where we refute the inaccuracies in this Truth Social post. The silence was deafening that came out of Skadden when we saw that. And when you check out that Truth Social post, folks, you'll see it is draconian what is going on. It is a lopsided deal. And it's clearly because somebody is twisting somebody else's arm. And yet we've talked about other firms that have said no. Perkins Coie, Godfrey Sussman, right? Sussman Godfrey.
Yep.
Wilmer Hale. There are firms, Jenner and Block, that are saying we're not going to do this. And I want to note that you've now joined a law firm with Abby Lowell. And so Abby Lowell was at Winston and Strawn, and they weren't a part of any of this, but Abby saw what was going on. And Abby has always been a big defender of people's rights. And And frankly, Abby has been stalwart in this. It didn't make a difference if it's a Republican or Democrat, right? Like, he's like, if somebody's rights are at issue, I'm going to be there. Talk about what you're doing now with Abby and his new law firm, because I think it's really exciting. And I want people to understand that you're not only speaking out, but you're also professionally taking an active role in a law firm that's been created to fight back against this administration.
Absolutely. And Abby has been such already an important mentor and teacher. And I think that the point that you make, that he's been stalwart in his defense of people broadly in the face of government overreach, regardless of presidential administration or similar, is accurate and well taken. And so I'm actually with the firm part-time, which is intentional, because there is so much other organizing work to be done. And as a quick plug, I have a couple of ongoing actions that members of the general public can get involved with related to holding law firm partners accountable, and also related to, hopefully by the time this airs, we will be live with an action that explains to people how they can file ethical grievances against the attorneys in the Trump administration that have been key in that have been key in this. So we have a draft one specifically for Alina Habba that should be live this afternoon or evening, related to the political prosecution of New York Mayor Ras Baraka. And also Representative McIver, but just for viewers, she's not mentioned in that complaint, because you have to only file after the legal process for the case that you're filing
has concluded.
Exactly. So we did not forget her, but that's the logic there. Anyway, that's at RachelCohenOfficial.com. But all of that to say, Abby and Lowell and Associates is not affiliated with that. That is not their vibe. We are very much on the professional side, pursuing litigation and defending people who have become targets criminally, civilly, congressionally.
Like Attorney General Letitia James from the state of New York. That's somebody that Abby Lowell is currently defending, right?
Absolutely. And I think that it is important to name that there's government overreach in any administration. And our intention is that hopefully in 3 years, we see a change in administration and we'll still be there to do this work. But I think in the immediate term, there is a real need to do this work to prevent the total collapse of the American Republic, right? Yeah. And we're happy to do it. I get happy to do it. We'll do it since there is so much work to be done, as I know you will as well.
That was a big part of my decision to leave mainstream media, to go into independent journalism, to join Norm Eisen, and actually co-counseling with Abby Lowell to be doing some of this work. I wanted to pull up another portion of your resignation letter, and I wanted to kind of speak about that as we conclude, because this was really important, because this is something that I'm teaching my 10-year-old daughter, Rachel, and I've shared this passage from your resignation email with my daughter. I don't think I've ever told you this.
No.
And I'm going to read it for our viewers. Like any self-important adolescent, I spent most of my high school history classes wondering what I would do in the moments before true horror or chaos, or where my values were tested and demanded great sacrifice. I do not wonder anymore. I know who I am. I thought I knew who we all were. I mean, it ends on such a sobering note. And yet I think, Rachel, it's still inspirational because I have said time and time again that we have to be on the right side of history when it comes to this. I will never tell my daughter if she asks me, but what did you do, Mom?
Yeah.
Why didn't you do something? She'll never be able to say that to me because this moment is too profoundly important for us to not be acting together. And what I love about this conversation, Rachel, is you've taken something that could have, in theory, derailed your professional career, and yet you've converted that trauma of having to be a part of that into triumph. You've made it something where you are carrying the banner for young women, young people, and young lawyers. I love how you're staying in this lane of creating all this advocacy at RachelCohenOfficial.com, because these are the things that we need right now, Rachel. We need plans of action. We need courses of conduct that will get us across the finish line. And so as you and I wrap up, Rachel, talk about what's next for you. You're just starting out. I know you're being pulled in so many different directions, and you've already talked about some of the initiatives you're working on, but do you ever envision yourself going back into kind of big law in any way?
No, I do not. Though I miss, and I'll loop way back around to the second point that I was going to make on profits over people, which is that I've heard from so many members of our staff, which I think is something that gets so overlooked in these conversations about big law and who is at risk, is that there are so many everyday Americans who have, I mean, even being a staff person at Skadden is a great job, but have really good jobs and feel so disenfranchised. And that's intentional, because there's a desire to make the system feel overly complex and to make it so that people don't feel like they can plug in. And I think that what's next for me, I think that the situation in the United States as a whole is evolving so rapidly that it's very difficult for me to answer even question. I think the first couple of times I got this question, I said that it was almost impossible that I would be practicing at any point again in the country. And then the opportunity to work with Abby came up, and it felt extremely both proactive and appropriately reactive to the moment. And so obviously my plans change very rapidly, but I do know that at the end of the day, they're guided by the deeper I get, the more I feel that we need people to be leading with pragmatic optimism. I think that it's difficult when we come and tell people, no, everything's fine. Things were fine before Trump was in office. They weren't. It's the country has been in the throes of kind of this late stage capitalism deferral to billionaires for a very long time. And now we're also seeing it transition into those billionaires having these huge roles in authoritarian government in the United States. And so I think we need people with a lot of privilege to name that, and then also to say, and here's how you get involved. And so what's next for me is continuing to organize with that kind of pragmatic optimism and making sure that people know how they can get involved.
Well, Rachel, I'm so grateful always for your time. You are very busy, but these are the kinds of conversations I want to have here at the Katie Phang News Channel, because these are the essential ones. These are the ones where we check in and we check in on each other and we make sure we're doing okay, and we give each other the inspiration to keep on going. And we get these action plans that you and I are talking about. And so I invite everybody who's listening to follow Rachel Cohen at all of her socials. Go to RachelCohenOfficial.com, which is a website which will give you some more insight into Rachel. And you know what? I am going to be thrilled to let my daughter know that I had that conversation with you today.
Please
Rachel.
tell her hello, and I'm sure that I'll be back.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.